Turning a little bit to Libor, it's another issue that is paramount to this group because we're talking real economics and we're talking about, to your point, a lot of them are held by pension plans and 401k, and we are talking about some amount of interest that they're supposed to receive, and how is that number going to change? I think everybody in our market has been very focused to try to make it a neutral transition to where economics don't move. What are you at the SEC, focused on with that, and what are you guys doing to help prepare the market and yourselves for that transition?
Yeah, well, we are paying quite close attention to this. I think this will be an issue that will be that will overhang the next few years for all of us. There are some people saying, don't worry, Libor is going to still be around, so don't worry about the transition. I think people can decide I don't want us, the government, to be the ones saying what the new rate needs to be, or even that Libor needs to go away. But I think the reality is that people need to adjust to the very distinct possibility of a post-Libor world. And that means that people need to be asking themselves, should we still be issuing Libor-based securities with a Libor benchmark there? I'm still surprised at the number that are doing that. Now, there is better fallback language that's being included, which is positive. I think one of the things we really worry about is that in existing contracts, the fallback language is really not appropriate for the idea of a Libor just disappearing. So we are going to have to confront that. And so we're working both internally at the SEC and then across other agencies to see what we can be doing on that front. One thing we did recently is put out a statement urging public companies to be thinking about how Libor transition will affect them. There's a lot of focus on Libor transition in some sectors and some segments of folks we interact with. ISDA has been very active in thinking through these issues, but what we fear is that there is a whole layer of folks in this space that aren't thinking about it at all, and so that was what we were trying to do, to tell public companies, hey, you need to be thinking about this. But I think there's some very tricky legal issues with Libor transition. You talked about not wanting there to be any, to have the economics stay the same. It's going to be very hard for that to happen. And so we're going to see a tremendous number of lawsuits, I fear, as these things get worked out. And I, as a securities regulator, who believes the importance of contracts and adhering to contracts, it does make me quite nervous to think about maybe trying to force down or cram down some kind of remedy that applies without getting buy-in from everyone who's affected by a change. So I don't know that we have good answers, but we're certainly trying to think through what's happening. We're looking, obviously, what's happening with potential alternative benchmarks. I think this period has been a very good one for us to see how SOFR is working out. We'll see some unusual things happening and ask, what do we need to do to think about maybe having some kind of a rolling 30-day average for SOFR, those kinds of things. So it's helpful that we have this transition period, but we really do need to keep getting people to focus their energy on thinking about this, because I think this will be one of the most important events in our marketplace in the next several years. And unfortunately, it coincides with a lot of other things happening. So the more effort that we can get into thinking about it now, I think the better off we'll be.
No, and I can tell you from our position, we are seeing a huge increase in the number of market participants that are focused on it. There's been a huge increase over the last 6 months. To your point, one of the things we notice is, at the end of the day, it feels like any alternative you take, there'll be lawsuits. Yeah. And we're analyzing very, very carefully the different options to be taken. And I think a lot of investors feel like, to your point, there's not language. It wasn't intended that Libor would ever go away permanently. It was more of a temporary disruption. And folks, in some of the contracts, it basically says it goes to the last set rate. So essentially, it's a fixed rate contract.
Yeah.
Is that what the investor signed up for either? So I'll tell you, a lot of times where people land back are like, can we have a transition where LIBOR stays outstanding for legacy deals? Because I think that those are the most difficult. And you hit this point right at the very outset of this discussion, which was, you know, can people stop making more legacy by not putting, you know, fallback that really addresses it into the contracts today? And I get calls all the time from investors going, why are they continuing to issue without fallback language?